Hi, this is Grandma and I'm reading Adam of the Road, and today I'm going to be reading the chapter Arrows in the King's Forest, which is chapter 13, and there's the picture. So you can see they're deep in a forest, and I see four horses and three people riding the horses. One horse has two people, and I would assume that the other horses just have a lot of packages, things to sell, because I think it's a merchant who is going to be leading this. But I'm a little puzzled about the arrows in the King's Forest. So we'll find out. Adam climbed the steep hill through the woods and came out on what seemed to be the very top of the world. On one side, miles of purple heather stretched away to the green lowlands beside the Thames, where the towers and spires of London itself showed like a fairy city in the misty distance. On the other side of the deep forest marched to the blue line of the South Downs and the Silver Sea. Where he stood, bees were busy on the thyme and blew milkwort. The fragrant breeze blew cloud shadows over his head. After a while, as he followed the white chalk tracks southward toward Farnham, the road sloped downward and distances were hidden by trees and the shoulders of hills. And I'm going to pause here a second because this is not the first time that we've heard of the White Chalk Hills. In this area of England, and further to the south is a place called the White Cliffs of Dover, so that when you're crossing the English Channel from France, you see this huge white cliff. Well, the soil is just not very deep until you get to the white chalk. And since prehistoric times, people have actually used that to create art. And in that area, it seems to be mostly horses that they draw pictures of. Most of the horses that have been carved into white chalk are more recent. They're just a couple hundred years old. But this one has been from prehistoric times. And so this one would have been around as Adam was exploring through the area. Now, they don't mention that here, but they do mention the white chalk paths quite frequently. Continuing. More people were on the road now. He scarcely knew where they came from. He asked all he met if they had seen a minstrel with a red spaniel or a minstrel alone hunting for a boy, but none of them had. When he came into Farnham, where three roads met, he found the little town full of people on their way to a fair at Winchester. Now, for the first time, Adam began to be really worried. Where was Roger? And how was he to find him again among so many folk, all intent on their own affairs? The road, Roger had said, was home to a minstrel, but thought Adam, which road? In and out among the people he went all afternoon, asking everywhere his well-worn question. Three he found who had seen Jenkin and Nick and thought they had gone to Winchester to the fair, but none among them all had news of Roger. When he got hungry, he went to the inn, and there he found one of the merchants whom he had seen at the Burford Bridge, the one who had taken ill at Guildford, and this one who was called William of Dover. Remember, I just mentioned the White Cliffs of Dover, had come on along with both their servants and their pack horses, so as to have their booths set up at Winchester when the fair began. The sick man would follow as soon as he could. Loss of goods may be recovered, as the old proverb says, remarked Don William, but loss of time ruins us. If I'm not at the fair when it opens, I've lost half my trouble. He made room for Adam beside him at the table and listened to his story. He said amusingly at last. They told you at Guildford Castle that Roger had heard you were gone to Farnham and had set forth after you? That's how the squire said it was, repeated Adam. Meanwhile, you had gone back to Guildford. Probably you were crossing the ferry when he was striding over the bridge. Very well, now let's figure it out. He comes to Farnham, that would be yesterday. He finds out that Jenkin has gone on to Winchester with the dog. He thinks you are close on their heels, and so he doesn't stay in Farnham. He keeps right on toward Winchester. Isn't that it?" Well, that sounded reasonable, Adam admitted, although it was just as likely that when Roger had not found Adam at Farnham, he might have gone back to Guildford by the other road, the one past John Ferryman's house. But Don Williams seemed so positive, so satisfied with his picture of what had happened, that Adam did not like to question it. After all, he was only a little boy, and the merchant was grown up and rich and wise. Don William had another cup of hot spiced wine while Adam scraped his bowl of pottage. He was hungry still, for he had had only an apple and a piece of bread for dinner. "Now, I have a boy at home," said the merchant, washing his hands daintily in the bowl of water that his servant held for him. "6 years old he is, and a chip off the old block. His mother tries to make a baby of him, but he will have none of it." A boy of 6 was a baby, thought Adam. Why, when he was 6, he could remember the little stone house away in the north, and the music coming from the minster, and his gentle mother who taught him to read and to sing before she died. When he was 6, he used to sit on her lap sometimes and rest his head on her shoulder and look into the fire while she told him in her soft, clear voice how he would one day be a minstrel and go on the road with his father. He'd been very young when he was 6. "I wouldn't like to see him drifting about alone," the merchant was saying. "Now, your father's as good a minstrel as ever I met, and he had a fine letter from Sir Edmund de Lisle. I know how he'd feel about you wandering about by yourself. I'll tell you what, you don't weigh much. You can ride behind my man Oswald on the horse, and no doubt we'll overtake your father before we know it." Well, that explains why there were 2 people on one horse. Last night at Guildford Castle, the night before the ferryman's house, tonight at Farnham Inn under the merchant's care. Adam thought he knew now why Roger said the road was home to the minstrel. It was because people were kind. He was a long time getting to sleep because he kept thinking of Roger and wondering where he was and how soon they would find each other. He was missing Nick too. If only he could have that warm, silky little dog to snuggle up against, he could sleep, he thought. Was Jenkin being good to Nick and giving him plenty to eat? In the morning, Adam paid a penny out of the 5 still in his purse for his supper, and half a penny out for his half of the bed, and he told the innkeeper what his name was and where he was going, in case Roger came looking for him. They took the road out of Farnham that went through the King's Forest of Holt beside a branch of the River Wey. They rode along close together, Don Williams first, then the other merchant's servant leading a pack horse with bulging saddlebags, then Don Williams' man, Oswald, with Adam perched behind him, and a laden pack horse following them. It was not swift progress, but it was pleasant to be riding again, though Oswald's tired and skinny horse was very different from Bayard. It was a little mysterious to ride through the King's Forest, where the trees oak and ash and elm and beech grew so tall, and the undergrowth was thick with fern and briar. Now and then they saw the river shining in the sunshine. Now and then they saw one of the king's fallow deer, standing motionless and startled in the sun-splotched shade. The birds kept their late August silence, but sometimes there was a bit of yellow and gray flitting among the leaves, or a flash of wings across the road. Most of the time, Adam saw only the trees that came up close to the road's edge, not cut back 200 feet on either side, as the law had decreed, and heard only the steady plop-plop of their own horses' hoofs. It made him drowsy after a while. Now, if you remember, earlier we had also heard that they were supposed to have 200 feet cut back from the road, and that was so that robbers couldn't sneak up on the travelers. Okay. Suddenly there was a shout, and an arrow came zinging in front of them to bury its head in a tree not 3 feet from Don Williams. The next moment, an arrow zinged past Adam and stuck quivering in the tree nearest him. Don Williams' horse, the most spirited of the 5, promptly reared up on his hind legs, while the others plunged and backed against each other in fright and confusion. Amid a great crashing in the undergrowth, 4 men rode shouting out of the woods. "Robbers!" thought Adam. "Robbers! This is happening to me!" One, the leader, wore full armor. From head to toe, he was encased in chain mail that caught the sun and gave it back in 100 winking bits. He was a knight. That Adam knew from his spurs and the crest on his helm. But he had gone to some pains to conceal his armorial bearings. His horse had no trappings. His own surcoat was plain black. Even the shield had been painted over with black. Only his crest betrayed him, a gilded leopard that reared itself from the top of his steel helm. Perkin would know, thought Adam, what family bore a leopard on its crest. He had a sword with a jeweled pommel that caught the sunshine, and he carried a lance leveled menacingly at the surprised and shocked merchant. One of the others with him was a squire, with sword and buckler and a dagger in his belt. The other 2 were yeomen, in green with long bow and quiver full of peacock-tipped arrows apiece. The knight's visor was closed, and nothing of his face was to be seen. But these 3 others had hard, leathery faces with small, mean eyes. Don William had a sword, but he was too busy persuading his horse to return to its 4 feet to the ground even to unsheath it. Each of his servants had a long knife at his belt, but what were 2 slightly dull knives against such an assortment of lances, swords, daggers, and arrows, all very sharp and plainly intended for use? Adam peeped cautiously over Oswald's shoulder and wondered what was going to happen next. "This is an outrage," burst out the merchant angrily. "Sir Knight, whoever you are, all of your men, and let us go our way." The knight made no answer. The eyes of everybody almost unwillingly turned to the 2 pack horses, and their very large, very bulging, very heavy saddlebags crammed with goods to be sold at the Giles Fair in Winchester. The knight nodded, and the squire, without a word, yanked off the merchant's sword and threw it clatteringly to the ground, tied his hands behind him, and handed the reins of his horses to one of the yeomen to hold. "Help!" bellowed the merchant with a burst of noise that amazed Adam. "Help! Ho! Robbers! Ho!" The servants took it up, and for a moment the woods echoed with their clamor. They made so much noise that Adam more than half expected a troop of horsemen to come galloping to their rescue. Nothing of the kind happened. The robber knight and his men silenced the other 3 speedily, and none too gently, by stuffing their mouths with their own hoods. Adam, just before they reached him, steadied himself with his hand on Oswald's shoulder, and stretching out his neck like a rooster, screeched a final, "Help! Robbers! Ho!" In that instant it occurred to Adam he was still free. He slid down from the horse, bent low, and ran under his belly. A man lunged at him and grabbed his harp. With a quick twist, Adam slid the thong off his shoulder. He stuck out his foot, hooked it around the man's ankle, and jerked. When he felt the man topple and heard him fall, Adam turned and plunged headlong into the underbrush. Briars tore at his clothes, and bushes scraped his cap off. Shielding his face with his arm, he bent over and ran close to the ground as fast as he could, put one foot before the other, plowing through the thick leafy growth and dodging around trees. He heard shouts behind him. An arrow sang over his head. He doubled back, tripped over a root and saw as he fell a beech tree arching its branches like a green tent above his head. The next second, he was up again, thinking with his feet and hands, with his knees and elbows. Before his mind had caught up, he was climbing into that beech tree swiftly, silently, like a cat, up into the sun-mottled tangle of leaves and branches. Just as he stretched himself out flat on a big limb, he saw a piece of dead wood that had lodged in a cleft. He seized it, flung it out in the air to fall with a snap and a rustle into the bushes 20 feet ahead. In that moment, one of the yeomen, following close on Adam's trail, stopped short and, without looking up, turned in the direction of the noise he had heard and the ferns he saw stirring suspiciously. Adam lay on the branch with his hot cheek against the smooth, warm wood and panted softly. An ant, its pathway blocked, ran over his face and he blew it off, but silently. The loudest sound in the world just then, he thought, was the noise of his own beating heart. The leaves, which were thick enough to hide him, also kept him from seeing what was happening. He heard footsteps as the two yeomen hunted for him. Footsteps crashing nearer, then going away, then returning right to his tree. He thought surely he was lost now, but the man had only come to get his arrow. The boy must have gone to earth like a fox, Adam heard him call. Presently, Adam heard the sound of horses' hoofs. He raised his head, strained his ears to listen. They were departing at a walk, all of them, the riders and the led horses, the pack horses. Now, there was silence in the woods again, except for a squirrel chattering. Adam sat up astride his limb. His face was red and throbbing and streaming with perspiration. He wiped it with his sleeve, pushed his hair off his hot, wet forehead, and slowly swung himself down from the tree. Now that the danger was over, he discovered what that scramble had cost him. Where his clothes were torn and where his flesh, how his shoulder ached and his knee bled. The road, when he limped out onto it again, bore record of the struggle in a mass of hoof prints and scattered leaves and twigs. Don William's sword, badly rusted, lay broken on the ground. The scabbard, which had been pretty, was gone. On the other side of the road, a path went into a forest. Here were more footprints. That must be the way he had taken them, the black robber knight. Adam stood and looked up that path to where it curved and vanished. Determination rose slowly like a tide within him and set his wide mouth in a straight line. Robbers! Stopping a good merchant who was going about his business without harming anyone. A knight who had vowed to be chivalrous and protect the weak. Somebody ought to go after him. The sheriff or the bailiff or somebody. Besides, they had his harp. With a wag of his head, Adam set off resolutely down the road to find the sheriff. So he stopped trying to find Nick and his father, and now he's going to get the sheriff to tell the sheriff about the robbery. And so chapter 14, here's chapter 14, and you can see Adam there, and it looks like he's talking to somebody very important who looks angry. So that must be the sheriff. And that chapter is called Adam to the Rescue. Well, he was certainly brave to do that, wasn't he? But it's put off now, him finding his father and his dog. I'm sure they'll get together eventually, but he certainly is having a lot of adventures. Bye-bye.